The Great Lakes constitutes the Earth's largest area of fresh water, 246,000 square kilometers, and one of the world's greatest collections of well-preserved shipwrecks. During the 1800s and early 1900s, thousands of sailing vessels used these waters to transport goods throughout the Great Lakes. There are far more artifacts and history contained on the bottom of these lakes than in all the museums. This is the story of only one of these submerged museums, or time capsules, that we call shipwrecks. It was late one evening in the summer of 1991. I was testing a magnetometer and magnetic mapping software that we were developing. A magnetometer is a geophysical instrument used to measure changes in the Earth's magnetic field. However, any iron or steel objects encountered produce what we call an anomaly, a disturbance in the field. While we were doing the testing, we did detect an anomaly. It was noted and logged so that when we had time in the future, we'd be able to go back and verify its identity. Targets like this weren't uncommon for this part of the lake. What we had checked out in the past had turned out to be steel drums, spools of cable, pieces of steel pipe and sheet, most likely garbage dumped from passing barges or ships. It wouldn't be until July the 1st, 1996 that we had time to verify this target. After spending the evening with my family, enjoying the Canada Day festivities and fireworks in Port Dalhousie, good friend Frank Parsgar and myself set out to use a drop video system to check the identity of the object detected 5 years earlier. The drop video system consists of an underwater camera and light mounted into a framework. This would allow us to visually determine what gave us that anomaly. From the type of targets that we'd found in the past, I wasn't really over anxious as to what we might find. I fully expected it to be just more garbage dumped from some passing vessel. But that was about to change. We got zebra mussels in here now, so maybe there's something else around here.
That's a good sign.
Oh look, wood. Got a piece of wood in here. Excellent. I think we're a little far up. Let her down just a little bit. Whoa, stop. What is that? That looks like deck. Look.
Oh my God. Okay.
Well, there's the rail. Nope, there's the rail. That's it. That's a wreck. No doubt about it.
You found it, buddy.
Excellent.
High five. You're the man.
Good one.
You got it.
Okay. With adrenaline now pumping, I didn't waste any time in returning to the site to make a dive on this new and exciting discovery. This time accompanied by Jim Honey, a longtime friend and dive buddy. Although when we left the surface it was warm and sunny, it was a bone-chilling 4 degrees Celsius and eternal darkness 120 feet below. When you first dive on an undiscovered wreck like this, you have to wonder. Wonder who the people were who sailed on her. Why did she sink? Were the sailors saved? Or did they perish along with the vessel? The time that we could spend on the bottom was very limited. We needed to view as much of the vessel as possible to help in determining the type and an approximate age. Then we came across a stove on the deck. This could mean that the vessel went down in the summer months, as the stove would have been put above deck to avoid heat buildup below. And then as I saw the bilge pumps, I had to wonder if someone stood there frantically pumping in the moments before this vessel slipped beneath the waves. A quick peek into the hold to see if we can determine a cargo. There's broken boards, a lot of sediment that's migrated in over the years, but no evidence of a cargo. Was it buried, or had it disappeared? I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw this tiller arm. Most vessels built after the 1850s would have had a steering wheel and steering gear. The tiller arm could very well be an indication that this was a pre-1850s vessel, making it indeed very old. The rudder as well seemed to be a very old construction. In looking closer, we noticed it was hung on pintles and gudgeons. This definitely was an older style.
That's beautiful, and we're the first ones on that one.
Fabulous. Absolutely
Love that.
fabulous.
Love that tiller. That's an
Jim.
oldie. That's an oldie.
What was it?
12. Did you notice the cleats? They're not metal, they're wood.
And I think the only thing we ever picked up on that was that little anchor at the front.
You mean as far as steel? There's not a lot.
No.
But as far as that taper I thought I saw, it was the mast going out the side.
Uh-huh.
Couldn't tell if I saw a crow's nest or not, but I couldn't go far enough. We were kind of low on time.
Did you catch that mast? It was angled, like it was squared. It wasn't squared, it was like octagon.
The mast itself?
Yeah.
When you first come across a discovery like this, you want to tell everyone. But you realize that's probably not the best approach. We needed to know if this wreck was historically significant enough to warrant a full documentation before turning it over to the diving community. To do this, I turned to fellow members of the Ontario Marine Heritage Committee, Dave Gilchrist, Jim Lockhart, and Gerald MacDonald, for their assistance. Yeah, Dave, Jim here. Wondering if you want to make a dive tomorrow. Well, that's the interesting part. We've got a new discovery, two-masted schooner just off Port Dalhousie in 120 feet of water, intact. Looks really old. I could use your expertise. Yeah. Do you want to give Jim a call? And I'll give Gerald a call and we'll see if we can get them together as well. Alrighty, sounds good. Talk to you then. Bye. Over the next couple of seasons, as time was available, a number of dives were made to closer examine the details of this vessel for clues as to its identity. With suggestions from the many knowledgeable members of the Ontario Marine Heritage Committee, the OMHC, various details of the construction were closer examined to try to narrow down the list of over 30 possible vessels. During this time span, the wreck site underwent some very significant changes, some for the better and some for the worst. The introduction of first the zebra mussel and then the quagga mussel into the Great Lakes was making significant changes to our diving environment. The zebra mussel had already made its impact in Lake Erie and the shallower areas of Lake Ontario where the water was warmer. But it was the quagga mussel that preferred the deeper, cooler waters that was making its impact here. When we first started diving this site, it didn't matter if it was day or night. It was always dark. You could only see what your light illuminated. There was only a small scattering of mussels on the site. Then in a very short period of time, the wreck became covered in a blanket of mussels, obscuring the fine details of the vessel. The mussels, being filter feeders, do have a positive effect. They clean the water. All of a sudden we could see almost all of the wreck at once, and without the use of lights, but only the shape of the vessel, as almost all the surfaces were covered with quagga mussels. Despite this blanket of mollusks, we continued our work. Video footage and notes that we gathered were then passed along to fellow members of the OMHC, archaeologists, and historians for their input. It was this feedback from them that was about to change our approach. The deeper the depth, and the longer the time that a diver spends on the bottom, the more nitrogen is absorbed into his bloodstream. The divers need to surface at a slow, controlled rate and decompress at predetermined depths for predetermined times to allow this nitrogen to escape from the body. Failure to follow these basic procedures could result in the dreaded bends, or even death. It's these factors that limited the time that we could spend on the wreck to only 15 or 20 minutes for each time out, making the collection of data very slow.
Now, Ian had a chance to look over the tapes, the original tapes.
Oh, what did he have to say?
Kind of interesting. His opening little paragraph here is, the majority of details and clues suggest that it's much closer to the type of craft of the Hamilton Scourge era than the later canalers. I would say certainly pre-1850s, possibly a transition schooner or brigantine built around the first canal time. It could even be from an earlier date but modified in a few details to fit the first canal locks. It is certainly an extremely interesting craft and of considerable historical merit. In my view, well worth further exploration and thorough documenting before the wreck gets ripped off. I would rate this wreck as one of the most important finds to date. As far as I know, there's never been a confirmed wreck of a transition era vessel, being the transition between the sailing schooners and the canalers. So if that is, and that boat, regardless of what it is, was built right around that time frame and was built for the first Welland Canal, it might be a one of a kind. There may not be any others like it. What I'm proposing is maybe we do this as a high-tech archaeological study. We do side scanning sonar for measurements. We use the ROVs to do a lot of the work, a lot of the measuring, because we can do it with sonar, we can do it with laser scaling. If we think this boat might possibly be the Henry Clay, then there would be a bunch of barrels of salt we need to find somewhere, so we could side scan the areas around the wreck to find out if there is a debris trail. And we definitely have to apply for a license through the Ministry of Citizenship, Culture and Recreation before we can do anything, actually. But I think that's my proposal anyway. I think that's...
Well, I think the four of us are committed enough to take on the project and work on it. It's going to be a big undertaking, but I think with the equipment that you have available, that will certainly assist
Save a
us.
lot of bottom time and the accuracy, like you say. It'd be really, really good, really documented.
Over the winter, and while our archaeological license and funding were being approved, our focus was shifted to researching details on possible vessels. The most probable at this time was the Henry Clay, built in Oswego by Henry Fitzhugh in 1831 for carrying salt through the first Welland Canal. We had very little success in finding details on the construction of this vessel, so a trip to Oswego was made to further our research. Our first stop was the H. Lee White Marine Museum. This museum was packed with information on the area. A large number of artifacts were also on display. Although intrigued with what we saw, there was no information about the Henry Clay. However, we did learn of the shipyards that did exist at that time. Our next stop, Oswego City Hall. We had made arrangements to view a book that was hand-drawn and presented to the city of Oswego by James Van Cleve in 1877. We had found that Van Cleve had had business dealings with Henry Fitzhugh, who had commissioned the building of the Henry Clay. This proved to be a most spectacular collection of data about various vessels from that time period and beautiful watercolor paintings. We did find some mention of the schooner Henry Clay.
In 1831, Henry Fitzhugh built a fine schooner Oswego and called her Henry Clay, placed in command an experienced sea captain who had but little respect for lake navigation. His name was Campbell. On his first trip from Oswego to the Welland Canal, she capsized with him off Niagara. Here we've got the schooner Henry Clay, built in 31, lost in 31. We've got the previous page, but there's no tons listed.
We spent a considerable time admiring this book and adding to our knowledge, and it was well worth the time spent. However, it did not add anything to our quest for details on the construction or the launching of the Henry Clay. We turned to the Oswego Public Library. We were sure there would be additional information here. We had learned of a book by Leo Finn called Old Shipping Days in Oswego. We did gain knowledge of the happenings of the time, but the mentions of the schooner Henry Clay were brief and with very little detail. We still did not know her dimensions or even who the builder was. We continued our quest, turning to microfiche of newspapers. Again, we found an account of the sinking, and then an account of the launching. It was mentioned that it was a beautiful calm day as the crew were piped aboard and she set sail on July the 18th, 1831. But that was all. Once spring had arrived and our licenses and funding were in place, it was time to start phase 1 of our survey work. This would be the side-scan sonar survey to try to locate a debris field around the wreck or any cargo lost when she capsized. Laura Garrington was also along for the ride to learn the principles of side-scan sonar.
This is the tow fish, Laura. There's a transducer on each side, this side, and on the other side. That's what sends the sound pulses out on each side. It measures the time and the strength of the return to paint a picture of what's there. What we do, we lift this guy up on here, and we lower him in carefully, not to get it in the front. Flip it in this. That keeps it there. Now we go inside. Okay, now the fun begins. What we've got is this line down the middle is actually our boat. Well, it's where our boat is traveling. The area on each side is a dead zone right below the fish where it doesn't see. And everything you get beyond that, that's the right side of the boat, and that's the left side of the boat, just the way it shows. So now we sit and we watch the screen for hours and hours and hours, waiting for something to show up.
Sounds fun.
Well, it's not. Until you find something. Then it is.
How big is that screen compared to the bottom?
Okay, the screen is really small. The bottom's really big. Okay. Now, from this center line, this here says our range is 80 meters. So that means we have 80 meters from here out to here, which is about 240 feet. And that's on each side. So we're covering a total of 160 meters or about 500 feet all at one time. Two more side-scan trips were made to completely cover the area that we had determined was the most probable in which to find debris, either jettisoned or separated from the wreck during the sinking. Side-scan sonar uses high-frequency sound waves to literally paint a picture of the lake bottom. This is the best way to cover a very large area in a relatively short time. It can, however, become very tedious, keeping the boat on a precise course and straining our eyes in an attempt to find what we're looking for. For this reason, we take turns driving, watching, and resting. The lake bottom reveals various ridges, anchor drags, mussel patches, and other geophysical features. What we are looking for is a series of small targets that could be either remains of barrels or other debris. Many times these surveys do take us late into the night. Once the data has been collected, it must be analyzed to determine what possible targets we have. Yeah, it's really kind of an interesting bottom because you've got ridges, but they don't all run the same way. They run all kinds of different directions. You've got patches of light, patches of dark, which is hardness. So you've got harder and lighter, which I think is mostly the mussels. And then you've got ridges that run almost like frost on a window in every single direction. Now this is an area that might be worth checking out. You see how it's sort of got a pebbly appearance? Now that could either be little bits of rock, zebra mussels, or is it possible that a lot of those little dots are actually parts of barrels? Cross your fingers. There's dunes down there, like just ridges. The big question is, are they naturally forming, or is there something under them and it's changed the flow of the current and it's actually deposited silt and covered what's there? Let's just see how that matches with the position we have on the other one. Pretty darn close, yeah.
Close?
Within a matter of.
So with the rove down, we'll target right in very quickly.
Yeah, we can just use the scanning sonar. We'll just match up the same thing so that we get the same image, and we can just fly directly to it. That's great. We've got a few targets there.
Three green targets.
Once the potential areas that could be debris fields were determined, we needed to verify or ground truth these sites. To do this, we would use a small ROV, or remotely operated vehicle. A scanning sonar was also mounted to the top of the ROV. This acts like an underwater radar, allowing us to locate possible targets from a distance and then fly directly to them. The first area to investigate, and the most probable, had appeared on the side-scan sonar as a whole field of barrel-sized objects sitting up off bottom. As we approached the bottom, indeed there were a number of barrel-sized objects. However, upon closer examination, we determined that these were just rocks covered with zebra mussels. It seemed odd that this deposit of rocks was so localized. All of the area around this area was just a flat sand bottom. It was also a bit disappointing, as this was our best target area and what we had really hoped would turn out to be a debris field. After carefully examining this area, we moved on to our second best possibility. Again, a flat bottom, and again, a series of rocks. The third area we checked out yielded some very interesting bumps in the sand. We couldn't determine if these were natural or if there was debris buried beneath causing the bump. Unfortunately, our archaeological license restricted us from disturbing the bottom, and therefore we would never know.
How was the trip to Lush? Successful, Dave?
Well, unfortunately, I think we've come back with less information than we went with in some respects. Confusing some of the aspects of the research that we were able to do. So, no, it wasn't successful from that point of view.
Not being able to prove that in the side scan work that we did, and we went through that, we found rocks.
Mm-hmm.
that looked like things, but they were rocks, they weren't barrels. Large patches of zebra mussels, or not, maybe not zebra mussels, but mussels of some type on the bottom. They turned out not to be it. There's a lot of ridges and stuff down there, but we didn't find any barrels, is what it really comes down to.
Yeah.
So what we know now is it was built specifically for the canal, because we checked to make sure there's no holes in the sides. And so she wasn't refitted. So that means it's got to be, the canal opened in 1829.
Yeah.
So it's got to be 1828 somewhere. It wouldn't have been built before that. To pre-1850. With the Hamilton that we think is very close in construction, that was the Diana when it was built. It was also built in Oswego for the salt
For
trade.
the salt trade.
Yeah.
Oh. Interesting.
So there's lots of similarities there between the designs and
Yeah.
So we'll continue on with the rest of the ROV work. We'll get all the documentation. We'll do all the measuring. Because we know we have a boat there, and it will at least document everything that's there. But parallel to that, we'll all see if we can keep doing a little bit of research and see if we can, like I say, that we work in those barrels, and we'll still try to dig up some dimensions or anything else we can.
Yeah.
The other thing to do the ROV work out there for anchoring the boat in, because we're going to have to be using a little bit larger boat than the inflatables we've been taking out. And we know how deadly anchoring is out there because it's hard to dig into that bottom, and we don't want to damage the wreck. What we were talking about was putting in like an anchoring system with screw anchors.
Right.
So what it means is we'd have to actually go out there and drill these screw anchors into the bottom with markers on them and a line that we can actually bring back up to the surface.
Right.
So if we do that, then we've got something that's, well, for the time being, permanent there that we can go out, use, and we know we won't damage the wreck.
Right.
Because that's my big concern, is if we tried to anchor a bigger vessel out there, if the anchor drifts away, you know, we could have an ROV caught on the wreck. If the anchor drifts into the wreck, I mean, we could do damage to it. And that's something we don't want to do, because we know the wood's fairly fragile.
Yeah. This is an excellent idea.
Just a quick briefing before we go down there so we all know what we're doing. I'm going to go down with the hat on with the camera, so you'll have communications and you'll be able to see what I'm looking at. Dave's going to go down as safety and make sure I don't get into trouble and cover that. Well, I'll take down an anchor, I'll take down a line with me, and I'll take down the extra tank with the impact driver. So we'll drive the anchor into the bottom. I'll hook a line onto it, and we'll bring that line back up. Once we've got that, we've got a 50-gallon barrel here, which we'll hook on and we'll just refit down so it's below the surface. That way, if it does pull the anchor out, it's not going to go rocketing to the surface. And that should give us at least 500 pounds of lift pull on it, so we'll be able to see how well that anchor is going to stay. With the drum now full of air and over 500 pounds of tension on the line, we then checked the anchor. The test was a success. It was now time to install the anchors on the wreck site. Our shallow water testing had paid off, as the installation in deeper water, where time was more critical, went very smoothly. With our anchoring system in place, we could now anchor larger vessels over the site without the fear of damaging the wreck below. The ROVs would now be used to fully document this wreck site. To do this, we would first use one of our mid-size ROVs, equipped with a low-light color camera for available light work, scanning sonar for measurements and navigation, and laser scaling for the more precise measurements. As we approach the bottom, the scanning sonar shows the ROV's location in relation to the wreck, allowing us to know where we are at all times. The first thing we need to do is visually document the hardware and artifacts on the site and their present location. This is done by making a number of slow passes over the wreck while looking straight down. This will provide an archival record of the present condition of the site, and images from this video will also be used to assemble the photo mosaic. After completing the vertical passes, a number of horizontal passes were made to provide a second dimension and cover the sides of the vessel and areas not seen in the previous passes. This would also help our artist Ian Morgan to produce detailed drawings of the vessel.
It becomes very, very important when a wreck like this is discovered that we spend some time actually looking at it, documenting it properly, so that in the future, when the site is degraded for whatever reason, we've got a record of what was actually lying there.
With all of the overview passes complete, we moved on to documenting all of the individual artifacts in detail.
The documentation of this vessel is very important for the historical community, for the diving community, and for the city of St. Catharines.
Once the artifact documentation was done, we started using the lasers to provide measurements of all the key components and structures on the site. The lasers on this ROV are spaced at 10 centimeters, or about 4 inches apart. The ROV had spent about 5 hours on the wreck site, which is about the equivalent of 20 man dives. We still had more documentation to do, but this one day of ROV work had gathered more information than the 2 previous summers of diving.
The chore of putting together the photo mosaic is a very time-consuming one. It involves taking all the images that we have of the wreck, comparing that to sonar images, which we can use for the measurements, and putting it all together so instead of looking like a lot of separate pictures, it ends up looking like the ship itself. Eventually we end up with an image that actually looks like the vessel that's sitting on the bottom. It's really quite amazing once you get all the pictures together and you can actually look at the entire boat at one time rather than what we see when we're diving, which is only a section at a time. Well, there it is. Product of 114 photographs, all made into one picture.
The balance of the ROV work would be completed by our latest development in ROV technology, the Stealth ROV. This unit was equipped with scanning sonar, laser scaling, a manipulator arm, and dual cameras, one being designed for extremely low light conditions. This camera provided phenomenal images of the wreck site from distances never before possible. Charlie Kozak was our sonar technician. He carefully logged the sonar data that would be used to produce measurements of all the major features. The advantage of the scanning sonar is that instead of divers manually stretching out a tape measure, the measurements are done with a cursor and the click of a mouse, saving valuable bottom time. These files would be recorded so that more detailed measurements could be done at a later date. Once the sonar mapping was complete, we took advantage of the visibility and headed out to the area of curious bumps in the sand that we had discovered with the side-scan sonar. While surveying this area, we made a startling discovery. There was an anchor drag from a freighter in an all too close proximity to the wreck. Had this anchor dragged much closer to our intact vessel, it may have been reduced to a pile of broken boards. This re-emphasized the importance of proper documentation, as this fragile vessel's fate was still in the hands of both Mother Nature and man.
I think that this project has proved the effectiveness of using high-tech equipment to perform underwater archaeological work. But it is a bit disappointing that despite the hundreds of hours of research from dedicated volunteers, we're no closer at putting a name on this important part of our marine heritage. Like many of the vessels that litter the bottom of the Great Lakes, the true identity of this vessel, for now, will remain a mystery.